Well, welcome everyone to Authors at Drucker. I'm Dave Specht, Director of the Global Family Business Institute at the Drucker School of Management. At the Drucker School, we aspire to become the global meeting place for the world's most influential business-owning families. This conversation today represents progress in our achievement of that objective. Authors at Drucker is an interview series where we feature top authors that write about issues impacting business-owning families. Authors at Drucker is made possible from the generous sponsorship from the James E. Hughes Jr. Foundation. The foundation is dedicated to advancing the study of family governance and generational well-being. We at the Drucker School feel very aligned and very grateful to Jay Hughes and his foundation for making this possible. Last month, we heard from Trudy Cathy White, author of A Legacy That Lasts, and she is the daughter of the founders of Chick-fil-A restaurants. If you missed that, please visit our website so you can listen to the recording. She shares some fantastic wisdom with us. Before we begin, I wanted to mention two other exciting initiatives, and I'm going to share my screen here quickly. The first of those initiatives is our certificate program in advising family enterprises. This is a training program that we've created. It can be offered in person or virtually. If you have interest in attending that with your organization, please do reach out to me as we're scheduling those sessions now. The other is our Generational Wealth Masterclass, which is coming soon. I did this with Jay Hughes, and this is going to be very exciting. We feature topics such as redefining wealth, navigating financially diverse relationships, appreciating and onboarding in-laws, etc. Never a dull moment with those topics. And if you're interested in that, please do shoot me an email and I'll put you on the list so that when it comes out, you can be a part of it. And now to the star of the show, Kareem, if you want to go ahead and spotlight Jamie and I want to just introduce Jamie. Dr. Weiner is a clinical psychologist with over 40 years of experience. In addition to his work with individuals and families, he successfully designed structured programs and systems to address the broad range of challenges people face, especially in business-owning families. He has a certificate in family business advising and family wealth advising from the Family Firm Institute. Dr. Weiner is the co-creator of Inheriting Wisdom, a firm focused on helping families garner meaningful communication between generations and provide solutions to sustaining wealth and strengthening families and their legacies. So Jamie, welcome to Authors at Drucker.
So good to be here.
So Jamie, today we're going to focus on your work that you've put together with Russ, who's also joining us today, The Quest for Legitimacy. And if it's okay, I wanted to start with a personal story of just how your work brought back some memories for me that are pretty tender. My father passed away a little over a year ago, and as I was reading your book and thinking about some of the giants that we grew up in the shadow of, I thought of my dad and wanting to be like him, but not wanting to be compared to him. And anyways, he was a giant for me. He was a college football player, and for that reason, I became a basketball player because I didn't want to be compared to him. So I guess we begin on that personal note. But this quest for legitimacy is one that is really important, and I look forward to kind of unpacking some of the principles that you discuss. So would you begin with maybe your own personal story and your quest for legitimacy? I think starting with a little bit of vulnerability will get us kickstarted really nicely.
Well, David, thank you for starting with a little bit of vulnerability. And you don't know where your life's going to take you, but when you have moments growing up that kind of stand out, later on they echo as themes. The one that and I start the book with it that really kind of stands out for me my father was a rabbi, is a prominent rabbi. For those of you who've been in Jewish sanctuaries, you know they're pretty simple. There's an ark in the center of the sanctuary that holds the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. And the way my father's office was, he had to come from behind the ark. We're sitting at a family service. I'm a couple rows back, and all of a sudden I hear this young voice, little boy, go shout out, "Mom, Mom, is that God?" Well, from that point on, it was pretty clear that I'd grown up in a prominent family. And no, my dad wasn't God, but he might as well have been, given the accomplishments he's had, and which I revisited yesterday as I handed some memorabilia about his life coming from Germany to the U.S. Holocaust Museum, and revisited how big his world was.
Thank you for sharing that. So fast forward, so you're a little boy having that experience, and now you're a full-grown man having this experience with helping others in this quest for legitimacy. You know, Jamie, you and I talked on our pre-call a little bit about, you know, the very, you know, there's what I would call an empathy crisis for rising generation, those that do grow up in the shadows of great individuals, great parents. I wanted to talk a little bit about empathy, and you know, why is it that advisors sometimes struggle to offer empathy to that rising generation as they try to find their why and their purpose in life?
So one of the people I interviewed talked about being approached by the family advisor and feeling like it was a complete disconnect. And it's a hard one for advisors, because to strip away the agenda of what you're trying to accomplish, a lot of times, which is to support the efforts of preserving the wealth of the generation from before, to step out of that and take a moment and just be there and hear the story of the rising gen, probably is one of the most valuable things that you could do for them. And it's particularly significant given the number of rising gen who don't end up using their parents' advisors, because they feel like the approach is all about the world of the giants that they've grown up with.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not, I mean, it's not totally foreign, because many advisors are approaching these giants, and they basically win the business by navigating the land of the giants. And for advisors to make the shift to stop serving a wealth creator and start serving a family unit is something that it can be a totally different business model. It's definitely a different mindset. But as we think about our most precious assets, you know, our most precious assets are not our financial capital. They're the human capital. And so as an advisor, and as you think about serving, as Jay would say, you know, all the capitals, we need to focus on that rising generation. I think you've done a good job of kind of helping us navigate some of that. So connected to that last question about following a giant, the question of who I am, especially in the shadow of a great giant. You in your book, you talk about who I am and a little bit about identity. I wondered if you would unpack that for me.
So, interestingly enough, as you said it, David, it occurred to me that if I take the 5 capitals that Jay talked about, the only one my father didn't have was wealth. He did come from parents that were wealthy in Germany before Hitler came to power, but
He didn't have financial capital, you're saying?
he didn't have financial capital.
Okay.
Well, he had a little, but in whole separate story, but eventually I got some reparations that came from Germany, which is a separate story. Um, and the whole question of who I am, sometimes I think it's kind of lost among the whole community that we have. And it's lost because we're very invested and involved in who the founders are, who future generations are, who are part of the now generation. When I started doing this kind of work, everybody talked about the rising gen as entitled kids. And through the process of interviewing 25 rising gen family members, I found that most of them felt that the task of measuring up was a huge challenge. And the process of doing it through a series of phases, through some difficult moments, was a quest. And it was a quest that was somewhat about externally how you're viewed, but predominantly about who you are on the inside and how do you radiate to the world and how do you become comfortable with having your own voice and agency in the world of a very large world that you grow up in.
Yeah, as I think about, the question of who am I, there is a question of, where does that value come from? Depending on your belief system, I mean, who we are should not be connected to the financial capital that we have. I mean, that should not even be a connection of who we are and how we define ourselves. But society definitely will do that for us if we don't define who we are for ourselves. And much of that, I think, needs to begin in the home at an early age. But one of those resources that is most scarce, especially for these giants we're talking about, is typically time. And so time with that budding, rising generation and helping them to figure out who they are and to make investments in their talents and to encourage them. I find that as a challenge for me. I have 6 kids and they need lots of investments of time and but there's nothing more important that we can do than helping someone, especially someone that we care about and we love, to figure out really who they are and to make sure that we create a structure for them to not be confused about the connection to financial capital and that being the defining who they are. Very tricky.
Yeah, that keeps coming back for me. So even just a week ago, I met a woman from Asia. Her father was building his success, sent her off to boarding school and kindergarten in the States. And on the one hand, he gave her a tremendous opportunity for education, but the ability for the two of them to have the heartfelt connection is something they're now struggling with as she's an adult. So it starts very early. And having 3 stepkids who I got sort of midway in my life and didn't birth them one at a time, got them all 3 at the same time. At this point, when I look at what I feel most legitimate about in terms of what I've accomplished is that special relationship that I have with them.
Fantastic. So moving from that question of who I am, there's a part of your book that talks about kind of this liminality or betwixt and between, and I think there's a lot of guilt that the rising generation faces when they're not quite sure where they're headed necessarily, these transition points in their lives. And I would love to figure out how to remove some of that guilt that they feel if they don't have 100% clarity of what they're going to do when they grow up. This is a safe group, so I'll say I'm 45 years old. I don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up. So why would an 18-year-old or a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old necessarily know? So maybe you can unpack that liminality or the betwixt and between for us.
So one of the things we found as a result of the research, remember the question we asked all the rising gen we interviewed is, what is it like growing up in the land of giants? They didn't start talking about, well, my parents have billions of dollars worth of worth or a business or any of that kind of stuff. They talked about their own personal struggle to sort out realizing they had some unusual opportunities in terms of kinds of education, travel, how to sort out who they were. And one of the examples that stands out for me was a woman who grew up in a business where science was a clear requisite to be part of the business, and not her passion. And longer story, she basically went through 3 careers, had a JD, an MBA, at one point fantasized working in the world of fashion to find a place where she felt she fit and she belonged. Wanted to make a contribution to her family, so it's not as if she was rejecting what she was born with. She shared with us that she grew up with at least 3 or 4 giants in her life, including her grandmother, she described as a force of nature. And so the breaking moments, the moments where she began to each time feel like this is not it, threw her into periods of liminality, into being, as I said, betwixt and between. Mm-hmm. And it's an uncomfortable feeling. I'm going to guess that most anybody who's on this call has been there at some point in their life. And what we lose sight of is those are moments of growth. We don't ask for them. We don't go, please give me a breaking moment so I can learn a little bit more. But they're calls to sort out. And I personally went through a whole bunch of them before, and I'm 73, so I've had breaking moments, for a lot of years. And it's been a long journey to go through the periods of feeling betwixt, which I call periods of liminality, to find a place that I feel like I'm making a significant contribution to the world and can have an impact.
Yeah. So there's another concept that obviously is closely connected, but I think we've heard it a number of times from our students at the Drucker School, where sometimes they just feel stuck as well. Can you talk about maybe the process of maybe not getting stuck, but maybe more importantly, getting unstuck? And there's quite a bit of guilt around feeling stuck as well. But do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I've had a wide range of experiences with people being stuck. In my career, I worked with adolescents who ended up in a psychiatric unit for 9 months. I've worked at Cook County Jail, and then I've worked with wealthy families. And, Cook County Jail is a very clear example of being stuck. The likelihood of once you're there, you're going to come back is pretty significant. But even more important, and I tell a story in the book about actually somebody was a family business consultant, grew up in second generation, and his father had this huge library of books, which I can really relate to. And he grew up feeling that he was going to be the next one taking on the role of running this consulting firm. And so when he looked in the mirror, even though others on the outside might see him as successful, he always felt that he still didn't measure up. And there's not one way to change that. It doesn't have a lot to do with perception, but it also has to do with being willing to struggle through what you're going through and find the nuggets that exist in the center of it, and use those nuggets to help you grow.
Yeah. A couple of things come up as I've been listening to you talk. I think, if we could gift anything to our kids, it would be resilience and grit, but you can't give it to them. You have to, you look at these giants, and many times we see their successes and we celebrate their victories, and sometimes we forget about the number of times they fell and skinned their knee, and they came up short. And part of what made them into the giants is them rising and trying again. And I think one of the big challenges that we face when there are resources is sometimes we try to clear the path. And so what we do is we end up raising children that maybe aren't as gritty or aren't as resilient for no fault of their own, maybe because we haven't allowed them to suffer natural consequences of choices, or to be able to say, you know what, success is in the pursuit, not in the arrival. And we're here for you. But there's a lot that we need to look at as parents and grandparents, in ways that we can help that rising generation. Another quote that comes to mind is, comparison is the thief of joy. If we compare ourselves to giants, we're always going to come up short. But I think it is the pursuit of an ambitious goal, where I've found joy, and not in comparing myself to someone who's steps ahead of me and trying to close the gap. Let me just go on to this next one. You in your book, you talk about 4 parts of the quest, and I wanted to just unpack each one of those parts. So the first one is self-awareness, and you talk about bursts of legitimacy, which I think is a fantastic way to think about. Anyways, it's just visual for me, bursts of legitimacy, and I think of all times in my life where maybe that was true. So, and that's clearly is about identity. So can you talk about that first stage, self-awareness and these bursts of legitimacy?
Yeah, I'm really going to ask everybody who's listening to think about your own lives and think about moments. I'm going to give you an example. One of the women we interviewed, I love the story, so somebody may have heard it before, grew up in a family that was a diamond family. And her dad came home with bags of diamonds and decided to teach her how to count using diamonds. Well, guess what? she went off to school, and when she compared how other people learned how to count, it usually was not by counting diamonds. And if you think about that moment, on one hand, it's kind of cute, but on the other hand, it was sort of both a realization of her family, of her being different, and probably some pride about what her family did, but also probably some discomfort that she was not like other kids. And I heard it in a little bit in what you talked about. I've experienced it in growing up. And that's kind of what we found as the first step in self-awareness, is that awareness that there's something unique or different about you that's both uncomfortable and in some ways a cue that there's some uniqueness about the world you're growing up in.
Yeah. So, self-awareness. So the second one is you talk about a tug of war and the sense of being pulled in maybe to the family, and also maybe wanting to spread your wings and fly a little bit and go maybe differentiate. Do you want to talk about that tug of war as a part of the process?
Sure. The story that pops into my head was, and it's really of somebody who was older and 40 years old, so it's probably not the beginning of her tug of war. She was in a program designed for people who wanted to give away their excess wealth. And she was part of a cohort of people doing it. And so I was at a conference, she came up, it was early in the morning, was glad somebody took the initiative to talk to me. And she said to me, she told me about the program, and she said, I'm at the final phase, which is to decide how much I really need. Now, a lot of moral choices in deciding to give some wealth away. Not saying, I'm not endorsing or not endorsing that, but I told her a little bit about what I was doing, and all of a sudden she changed and sounded like a young girl and said, I haven't told my parents. And I, at that moment, could feel that even though she was in a period of exploration, there was a pullback to that struggle of wanting parental approval, wanting them to be able to accept the diversity of the decisions. And you can imagine how that starts as a small kid when you begin to go out into the world and realize not everybody operates the way her family does.
Yeah. Yeah, I think of a young man that was in my class at the University of Nebraska a number of years ago, and grew up in a very prominent family. The only son, the only child of a couple, and dad was really worried that he was going to go away to grad school and then take a job outside of the family firm, and then decide he didn't want to come back. And so it was a real challenge, for that young man to decide, do I go out and explore the world, or do I stay here and acquiesce to my father's wishes? And there's a great deal of pressure, at a young age. So that tug of war is real.
Yeah, I would guess, David, that a lot of people, when they're debating whether to go into the family business or not go into the family business, and this starts at a much earlier age, right? It doesn't start at 18, 20, 25 years old.
Yeah.
Holds either way. And I have plenty of stories of people struggling with that.
Well, and you think about the messages that we deliver over time to our kids, and how those messages show up for them and register, messages like, someday, honey, this will all be yours. You tell a 7-year-old that, and that means something to them. And you may not say it again but they probably remember it, and there's some sort of expectation that comes along with it. And whether there is great excitement about someday, honey, this will all be yours, or there's great worry that, well, I don't want to be in that. I'm not interested in the business that you're in. How you say you're not interested in the business that your parents built feels a lot like saying, I don't love you. And there's a lot of challenge with that. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Jamie.
Well, you flashed, had me flash into the recent coronation of King Charles, who was 70 years old when his mother died. People were saying, is he prepared for it? Is he going to be able to handle it? And in the background, he had independently grown $14 billion worth of financial worth, maybe more, but that's the published number. And you're going, and he did stuff about climate, and so it's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah. Well, every time I've asked a founder or a business leader if their rising generation was prepared either to enter the business or to lead the business, the answer was always the same. Do you know what that answer was, Jamie? Not yet. Not yet, but they're getting close.
It's getting close, right? It's just a few more things.
And yeah, what I try to remind them of is that they weren't 100% prepared when they took the throne either, when they took the mantle of leading the business. And so to assume that the rising generation is ever going to be 100% prepared to run a business or an enterprise that's changing and that has market dimensions to it and other things that are external, it's just not a good expectation. So I try to squash some of those expectations for the senior generation, and sometimes it's helpful.
That's a task in itself, but
It is. It is. Well, let's move on to step number 3 or stage number 3, which is exploration. You talk about a license to explore and share some stories about, looking outside of the family business to actually find perspective. Do you want to share a story or two about that exploration phase?
Oh, I'd love to. It's my favorite phase. I put a couple chapters in the book, a separate chapter on exploration. One of the stories that it actually just touches me every time I think about it is a woman who's a Mexican, father built a significant business in Mexico, got involved in other family members, and it turned out that that was not a good decision to make, so he went bankrupt. And her mother helped her, in spite of the financial challenge, to keep exploring the world. She would send her off to programs where there would be other rising gen from around the world. They would share differences in culture. She tried going to places where she could do hands-on helping of other people and see if that fit for her. And the challenge with this one is we assume going off to college is going to be that phase of exploration. And particularly in a world of helicopter parents, and somebody sent me this absolutely marvelous two-minute video about watching a caterpillar turn into a butterfly. The guy watching it is looking and sees it go through the first half of it, and then it seems to be stuck. So he helps cut the bag off the end of the caterpillar. And guess what? The caterpillar didn't develop wings to be able to fly. And I think the period of exploration is that opportunity to sort out I'm involved now in thinking about ways to make that happen for rising Gen family members. Because I think some of that in the tradition of rites of passage needs to involve some separation, some sense of doing something independent of the world you were brought up in.
Yeah. Yeah, this one's again personal for me. My daughter just returned from a church service mission in Toronto, Canada. She was gone for 18 months. And that was very much that experience for her. She individuated, became independent. And Jamie, she came back and I don't think she needs us anymore. In fact, now now she's married. So she individuated and now she's launched. And
Yeah, well,
those experiences.
there's a catch to it, you know.
There was a catch. There's a catch.
It's not good for everybody, but
No, it's exactly what we wanted for her. But let me just pause now, and I want to encourage those that are on the call today to submit a question in the chat. I have another question or two, but I wanted to spend the last 15-20 minutes really opening up the conversation. So if you have a question, go ahead and submit it in the chat, and then we'll bring you on to ask that question. So Jamie, I wanted to talk about number 4, which is ownership. I love the concept of owner by choice, not by force. It's a concept I've been working with families for a long time, creating paths to liquidity so that those that stay in ownership are owners by choice. Can you talk about the importance of agency and why that choice to be an owner is so important?
yeah, some of it's very personal for me. I struggled for a good number of years about whether I was going to become a rabbi or not. I think the challenge would have been that I always would have felt in my father's shadow. And so how do you break out and do something that you feel that is significant enough that you feel legitimate? Repeated stories of Rishi is a major character in the book. Without going into a lot of detail, he gets fired at one point by his father, coming back from the World Cup by email, and stopped talking to his dad. And after 2 years, went and knocked on the door, not knowing what is going to be on the response on the other end. That moment changed his relationship with his father. I've managed to meet a brother of his that pulled back, and they want to have a relationship, but if they feel it's over controlled, it becomes very hard, and it's almost a strange paradigm that the very people who didn't do what their parents wanted to do to become and took the adventure to become founders. All of a sudden, based on the fear, the challenge that they've experienced, grab on extremely tight and become very controlling. So I don't mean ownership in terms of interest in the business. I can tell everybody that at 73 years old, the day my last book was published, felt like a moment of taking ownership for me in my life, because I really believed, whether it turns out that way or not, that I have created something that could make a difference in other people's lives.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jamie. Well, we have a few questions in the chat, so I wanted to open that up. And Steffi, do you want to ask your question? You talk about just dealing with judgment. If you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Sure. Hi, Jamie.
Hi there.
Are you in LA or are you in Chicago?
Today's Chicago, tomorrow LA. Let me look at it.
I recognize those cabinets. I think you're in Chicago. Anyway, so my question, the dreaded term Nepo baby. I think I cringe when I hear people using that. It's just grossly unfair. How can, and at the private high school I went to in Milwaukee, I saw people struggling with this syndrome of their parent is well known, their grade, blah, blah, blah. Then how do they become themselves? But to deal with specifically, how do you deal with outside judgment as a kid, a child, the rising gen, when you've got maybe people calling you that to your face, or it's going on? Like one of my friends went to work for their well-known company, but the family policy was you go work somewhere else first. So, but she still got, well, she's only here because her dad's the CEO and the family name is on the company.
So Jamie,
let
Jamie, you tackle that one. Let's try it. How do you deal with it?
Well, Steffi, thanks for giving me an easy question to answer. It's very hard because it's not a 1 minute answer about what do you do. It's really a process of building the confidence inside. And, as you get older, one of the nice things about it is, at my age, not as much bothers me, right? Very hard to say to somebody 18, 20, 22 years old, at some point, all of this isn't going to matter to you. But that is the truth, right? At some point, it isn't going to matter. And there is a point, particularly when somebody's entering a business and the belief is they're just there because they're somebody's kid, is for either internally or externally to say, but yeah, I really need to prove myself as a result of that, and I'm planning to do it.
Jamie, go. Did you have something else? I would just wanted to add to that. One of the wisest people that I know is my wife. And I think what she would say to a question like this is, you have to ask yourself the source of who is asking the question. And that person is, why are they asking that question? That question has nothing to do with you, or that accusation about you has more to do with the person that is making the accusation or making that comment than it is about you. And now saying that to a child, they may not understand that, but I think for us, I think it's good context. So I'll give all the credit to my wife. I'm pretty sure I've heard her say that. Thank you, Steffi, for that
too. So it's very helpful, but
thank you, Steffi. Monica, I wanted to get to your question. If you could take yourself off mute, if you'd like.
Hey, hello, Jamie. Nice
Hi.
to see you. Yeah, I would like to ask you, is there some miracle recipe for the proper preparation of next generation to take over the company, or some Jamie's recipe or something like this? If you have something similar in your book, maybe during the different phases of growing and takeovering.
Well, I love your wall, first of all, but so you're asking me about taking over a company
to managerial or to preparation of a young generation to sometimes to take over, because if we had some webinars, there was some family members from fifth or sixth generation, and when I was reading their experience before joining company, it was a long paper, so I want to ask if you are fan of this preparation outside of company to young generation to prepare outside, but then you can afraid that they will not want to come back, of course. So how to motivate them, how to prepare them to take experience outside, but with pleasure come back to the company.
Jamie, you're getting no easy questions on this webinar.
You're making me work. So one of the families I interviewed was a 250-year-old family. There were 2,400 family members who had some emotional, psychological connection to the family. The understanding was that probably only somewhere between 6 to 12 of them would ever become owners of the family, of the business, and have the liability of ownership. The beauty of that is the young man, he wasn't a young man, he was a young man, but from my perspective, that I interviewed, grew up having to discover the world first and having to prepare himself for a life that he wanted. And he ended up doing some work in a similar industry, even knowing that that was not a guarantee that he would find his way into the business. The second one is a company that I recently had a conversation with that's 180 years old and has a pledge that they're only going to give ownership to the next generation by merit. And they've worked very hard to develop a multi-year program to help prepare that generation to find their place in ownership. Recently, they've also decided to offer some of the rising gen who don't want to go that track, another track to find ways to be successful outside. But I think it's a huge question that you're asking, probably even more complicated in G1 to G2, 3, in earlier phases of families. And it's really helpful sometimes to have mentors from outside of the business, to have experiences from outside of the business.
Good answer, Jamie. I think you did great. Well, I don't want you to get too comfortable. Let's go to another question in the chat here. This one comes from Christiane. And Christiane, I don't know if you can take yourself off mute if you'd like to ask your question.
Oh, hi, Jamie. Hi. No, I don't have experience with 250, but I was thinking when you work with rising generation and always come this communication sometimes, and they're so like tech savvy, and like the first, like depends on like the great grandma, it's not, but what are tools and things that you help them communicate and they can all like understanding their purpose, but not because they relate better sometimes with technology, and the other ones, what is something that in your experience you help them for them all to be in the same spiritual proposal, let me say.
So I have two parts, Tom. I want to respond to that.
Mhm.
What if we can begin, instead of thinking about the rising gen as connected to a certain age bracket, I think about rising as a lifetime thing that we do. And if families could think about rising as, not them versus us, I think it's a huge step towards doing that. And I've really now doing work to turn the concepts of the book into experiences, which I don't have enough time to go into here, but and I think there are ways to do that within the family structure. And I also think there are ways for family members and there are other people doing it as well, to have an experience outside of the family. And I'm not talking about business training. I'm talking about the internal work that I think becomes very important to feel prepared and decide what kind of impact you want to have.
Thank you.
Hope that's helpful.
Christiane, I would also add there's no substitute for storytelling, and having that rising generation learn about their roots, I think, is one of the most powerful activities that I try to instill. Is assign them to talk about their 4-generation chart, and if there's an immigration or there's a start of a business, or patterns for health issues. That rising generation learning about their past allows them to see who they are, and they feel connected. And then for that family to write the story of their future together is one way to do it. And I think using technology to do that, that rising gen may tell their story differently than their parents or their grandparents would tell that story. But using technology to capture those stories, to capture voices, for a rising generation to interview their grandparents about times in their life, those are really impactful ways that the rising generation that are interested in using technology in interesting ways can connect with their past, learn about who they are, and feel connected. And I think when you have a rising generation that feels connected to the past and understands the context of some of the challenges along the way, it allows them to develop a great deal of resilience.
I think that's a wonderful comment. I just want to emphasize, to going back to before the founder, to the immigration, the coming from poverty, the having a difficult relationship with a parent, all the parts of the story that drove a founder are, I think, as valuable as seeing the founder as the one who got to the peak and made it. And I think that makes a real difference when those stories come out.
Yeah. Thank you for your question, Christiane. I wanted to get to one other for sure here. Elaine, if you could take yourself off mute, you had a question about resilience and grit. Would you like to ask your question?
Yes, please. Thank you. Well, great webinar to both of you. And I wanted to know if you have any ideas, creative ideas, to instill resilience and grit to the next generation, particularly towards money and purpose. Any examples or ideas, that would be great. Thank you.
I love the mix of money and purpose, right? I have to start by saying, money over here, purpose over here.
Should be like this.
And I think that's a big challenge, to separate money, the business, the assets, all that kind of stuff, from the pursuit of purpose. I'm also going to say that once you have a sense of purpose, dealing with money and assets is a more manageable task to do. So that's why I'm really emphasizing separating the two. That said, a lot of rising gen get amounts of money that most people don't get pretty early in their lives. And they get them usually in trust or some form where they don't own them. And I've heard Jay talk about it. The odds of that working out well or not being in a moment of joy are low. So I think getting money and having to manage it implies there's a struggle you're going to go through by having that happen to you. And yes, it's an opportunity, but it's also a challenge.
Elaine, one thing I would share is that money is a magnifier. So without a purpose, there's going to be a bewilderment. There's going to be a sense of being lost. If we have some character flaws or deficiencies, that's going to be magnified by the money. If we are charitable, if we have a vision for what we want to do, the impact we want to have, and then you add money on top of that, that's going to magnify that opportunity, magnify the joy. So I would spend most of the time figuring out how to clarify purpose. I think you start with individual purpose, but then if you can find kind of a few things that become the family purpose, then you can allow that money to be a part of the teaching tool. But our purpose shouldn't change whether we have a little money or a lot of money. It's just going to magnify it. And that's been my experience. Hopefully that's helpful, Elaine.
Thank you. That's awesome. You saved me a lot of time. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Okay, we are 1 hour has just flown by. So I want to just thank you, Jamie, for sharing the wisdom from your book. And this quest for legitimacy is real. Any of us that are on the phone that are, whether it's working with our own family members or advising others, my invitation is to lead with empathy, and patience and kindness, and encourage curiosity in that exploration. What a quest it is. There can be great summits and a lot of joy, and there can be also some dark moments of not knowing. And I think as family members or advisors to Rising Gen that are on this quest, there's nothing better that we can do than go on it with them and help them along the way, and maybe normalize some of the challenges that they face. It is a good work. So, Jamie, I want to thank you. I also want to encourage those that haven't picked up the book, The Quest for Legitimacy. It's well worth the read and the time. One other thing is Jamie is launching it's called the inaugural Rise experience from the Quest for Legitimacy, and that will be held in Oxford on the 24th of July through the 26th of July. So if any of you are interested in joining him on that Rise experience, going on your own quest, I would encourage you to reach out to Jamie. Also, next month on Authors at Drucker, we'll hear from Bob Doherty and Russ Prince about their book, How to Build a High-Performing Single-Family Office. I appreciate you guys investing your time with us at Authors at Drucker, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you again, Jamie.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Yes, take care.
Jamie, is it possible to get the notes from what you talked about today?
Send you the list of questions I got asked, Joni.
Say it again, what?
I will send you the list of questions that
You got asked.
we discussed.
And okay, and including some of the answers you had.
I didn't write them out.